Okay, it is Tuesday, June the 2nd, and welcome to week number 4 already of Introduction to Criminal Law. And I'm Professor Richard Wright. Um, I got a number of things I want to talk about. First of all, I want to talk about um, the fact that last week, um, on Tuesday actually, I talked about the topic was crimes against property. And one of my uh, topics was excessive use of force. And it's very interesting that that actually is something that took place last week in reality. As you all know, the police officer um, essentially, in my opinion, murdered that young man, uh, George, George Knox. I think his name is George. I know his last name is Knox. And the truth of the matter is that I'm going to tell you right now that George Floyd, thank you. Um, Knox is sticking out for something else that I'm doing, but George Floyd, thanks. And so the fact of the matter is that I have been observing and paying close attention. Let me go back to what I was able to see via that video that was taken by that young lady, and also other videos that I've been able to see. First of all, number one, the tactic that was used by that officer is unauthorized. It's not taught in any department. The closest thing to this was what happened years and years ago with Eric Garner, when that was the original I Can't Breathe. And one of the things that you should be aware of, as I was still teaching criminal justice then, is that many departments began to uh, teach their officers against using even that tactic. Well, this officer, uh, was not in a position where he was trying to control anybody. He was um, not the man. George Floyd was not struggling. He was pleading, and you all heard him. And I heard an idiot say that if a person can say, "I can't breathe," that's proof that they're able to breathe. That's an idiot that said that. And um, the fact of the matter is that he didn't have enough air in his body. And so the police officer who had his knee on George Floyd's neck for that long period of time and put his hands in his pocket. I have never, in all my years of being in dealing with law enforcement, being an attorney, ever seen anything like that in my entire life. It's and so as a result of that, uh, the officer was charged with third-degree murder. Now, I've kind of looked at this from the perspective of what the prosecutor said. The prosecutor said that they brought third-degree murder charges to get him into custody. But there is a call, and I joined in that call and in increasing that to at least second-degree murder. I've done a little research and found out that Minnesota's third-degree murder charge is a very hard charge to prove. And I can tell you this, people, that this whole thing has created a schism in the minority community. And speaking as an African American male, uh, disgusts me. It should disgust any of us, regardless of our race, sex, or national origin. and that you cannot operate carrying a badge with this type of activity. And then regarding the other three who were complacent, who were doing nothing, except I saw another video that from another angle, and at one point the three of them were holding him down from his back down to his legs. So we got some problems here. That officer that was standing and keeping the people away, some people may or may not know this, but there's been reports that he was the brother-in-law of the officer who had the knee on George Floyd's neck. And so the bottom line is this. You guys remember me teaching you guys in other classes, if you ever had any, or if you will have any other classes, you will hear me say these words, that I teach law enforcement or criminal justice from three perspectives. And that is from an ethical, professional, and educated perspective. I expect each and every one of you guys to adopt that as a habit in school and carry it over into your careers in the future. I've had a number of students who've reached out to me who actually one in fact is in Minneapolis and she was sharing how disgusted she was about it. And she said that the department that she works on, which is one of the suburban departments, that many of the officers were disgusted uh, with what they saw. And so what this guy did was he just put another nail in the coffin of the community trusting law enforcement. It is problematic. And you guys up there in Minnesota know about Philando Castile. And I'm told there are other instances up there in Minnesota. Across the country, there have been going back to Rodney King, all the way through. But I go back even myself to 1969 when Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, two Panthers, were assassinated by the police here in Chicago area. And so I've done a lot of studies. I've worked on projects involving violence with law enforcement, and I reached a stage that it is important for me to make a contribution to change the tide by teaching my students the proper way to operate. And that's why ethics is so important. This code of silence thing, it needs to go. And there are people who say, well, I have never seen it. It's there. It's there. It's systemic. And so I heard one, I've been watching CNN quite a bit. I saw a special feature on Sunday, and it was put together, and Don Lemon was the commentator. And in that, Spike Lee came on and released a video that's a 3-minute video that reminded us of what he um, depicted in Do the Right Thing with Radio Raheem, who was a fictional character played by a guy by the name of, I think his name was George Duke. And so he was choked with a baton by police officers, and he died. And then he went on to show us Freddie Gray, and then he capped it off by showing us George Floyd. Let me say this up front, that I am disturbed by the violence that I see that's taking place in the country. There are opportunists out there. I can tell you you guys aren't old enough to remember 1968 when Martin Luther King was assassinated as a leader, and how the people just began, just went, start burning everything. Well, there are two parts to that that you should be aware of. Number one is that there is a lot of um, pressure being built up in the African American community concerning law enforcement officers and how law enforcement officers operate and behave. And so this is kind of like the, if you know anything about a pressure cooker, you can't just open it. Just like if you have your engine, you can't just take that cap off on the radiator, otherwise all the pressure. Well, this is what this is, and the pressure being released. Unfortunately, there are individuals who are going to be opportunists who are going to step in, and they're going to take advantage of it for their own personal agendas. I personally explain to people that most police officers are good, professional, educated, and ethical police officers. However, you heard the old saying, one apple spoils the whole bunch. Well, this has been a major setback that's taken place. And then I'm going to tell you this, that people are able to peacefully protest, you know, and where I've seen some goof ups by the police, where a CNN reporter was arrested while filming what was going on. Some of you guys saw that. And then the governor was very upset. Governor Walz, the governor in Minnesota, was very upset about the whole thing. I take my hat off to the chief of police in Minneapolis for what he's saying. I take my hat off to what I hear the mayor saying in Minneapolis, and also St. Paul as well. The truth of the matter is good people, you guys have a job ahead of you, and I'm going to keep on doing what I do to eradicate. And you also found out that um, the officer who had put the knee on George Floyd's neck had numerous complaints that had been filed without action. And so it's problematic. The police unions need to come together and recognize life over property. And so, as we learned last week, the most serious offenses that you can get in criminal law involve dealing with human beings. Before that, remember the week before, we talked about dealing with property. And so I am going to conclude this section and get into the module by saying this to you, that we are in a pretty bad state with this coronavirus. And I'm going to tell you something, some of these protests and some of these, there's going to be, it's going to set us back. It's going to set us back. And it is really a problem. One of the last things I want to say is I am very appalled as a man of God at the move that the president did yesterday. Some of you may or may not have seen it or know what I'm talking about, where peaceful protesters were in Lafayette Park, which by the way, I protested in Lafayette Park a Supreme Court decision in 1977 when I was in law school. And so I know about Lafayette Park. And anyway, what the president did was he had took this opportunity to move peaceful demonstrators out of the way, having law enforcement to use tear gas and rubber bullets and batons and shields to push the people out of the park, out of the area where they were able to demonstrate, so that he could get a photo op at a church across the street and hold up a Bible, not to pray, not to make a comment about what's going on, but just a photo op. Every minister that I know on the face of this earth that I have talked to have all been appalled by that. I don't care if you're left, right, center, or whatever. The point of the matter is that um, it's pretty bad. Mayor and sheriff ordered a curfew here, and see, and see, you can't use curfew and then turn around and gas people who are still protesting after the curfew. The purpose for the curfew is not to stop people from protesting. The purpose for the curfew is to stop people from looting. And that's the key thing that has to take place. Uh, it's a big mistake. It's a big mistake. You're in Florida. Are you in Tampa? You're in Tampa, Brother Presley? Jacksonville. Okay. Florida, period, not one of my favorite states when it comes to civil rights. Uh, but the point of the matter is that I don't like that term law and order, because what it means is force. And we're already in a situation where there's a problem. There was a curfew in my city too. Yeah, well, the curfews came about, and that's what I'm saying. The curfews should deal with that. But the people who are peacefully protesting, that shouldn't be. But what the president did was, it wasn't even curfew. It wasn't even time. What he did was, he pushed the people out simply for a photo op, and he used the Bible, which I totally am offended by that. I have watched many ministers come out and say, this guy, this is not right. This is not right. It's like there's a fire going on, and this man is holding a tank of gas and pouring it on it. You saw the CNN special, the photo situation, and thought it was just very sad. Yeah, it's horrible. It sets a bad example. How is it that our kids, growing up, can see this? So anyway, the whole point in a nutshell is that we're in some pretty troubling times now, and so I'm gonna just hunker down and continue to do what I do, and that is to produce students who are going to operate on that basis. If any of my students are ever caught in a scenario and I see them down the road where there's a scenario even close to what is going on here, I'll find them and communicate with them and says, what, that's not what you learned in school. That's definitely not what you learned in any of my classes. And so the key thing is, guys, you guys got to be the example. Be the example and lead the way. So anyway, prayer is in order, whether you believe it or not. It is in order, and that we got a double whammy. The coronavirus is being fed by these actions, and that it's problematic. For me, as a 70-year-old African American male who's in what they call the highest risk group, I'm being very smart about what I do and making sure that I stay safe. And I encourage you guys to stay safe. Okay, let's get going here. Um, but let us not operate like ostrich or turtles in this scenario. And let's continue to be able to stand. Someday you will be placed in a position in your careers in criminal justice, um, and you're going to find there are going to be bad cops, corrupt cops. I was the village attorney in a town that had corrupt cops, and I became an investigator. And I worked with the feds to get that rooted out so that they don't even have a department today in that town. So you got to operate ethically, guys. You got to operate professionally, and you guys are getting a very, very good education. Oh, one last thing. You should be proud of Rasmussen College, the leadership from the president, Trenda Boyd Breen, who is now officially um, retired as president of Rasmussen College, to Tom Slagle, who's the chief financial officer, and to Ann Leah, who's the interim president. They issued a statement that was sent to all of us, faculty, staff, and students, um, on making a statement denouncing the actions of that police officer and expressing sympathy to the family of Mr. Floyd. And so I'm very proud. I'm proud to work for Rasmussen. I'm very proud of what we do here. All right. So anyway, let's get going here and let's move on to the stuff that we have to cover. All right. So now here we are in our fourth week. Now, let me say this is the same thing I said last night. I said that after week 3, week 4, that you will not be able to hand in assignments from weeks 1, 2, or 3. Well, to be honest with you, you can still hand in assignments. However, week 1, you're going to have a good reason why they're late. And if they're late and I don't have a reason, then I'm just going to zero it out because it's beyond 7 days. So too is week number 2. So week number 3, you have until next Sunday, this Sunday coming up, to get those assignments in. Of course, you will lose points unless there's some extenuating circumstance or reasons why that happened. Okay, I haven't been too tough on people getting the key phrase because of the delay of the video. Just like last night, some of you are in the drugs and crime course. I just saw that it just came up, so I'm going to be getting that out tonight to students. So tomorrow night is when those of you who are not here will get this key phrase that I'm going to give here. So that's it. So let's make it clear. After week 4 is completed, which is Sunday at 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time, and that will be Sunday the 7th. Okay, you will not be able to turn in assignments from week number 3, rather, I should say, or 1 to 3. All right, let's go and look at the course calendar. Here we go. Let's look at it. See it? Let me move this out the way a little bit. There we go. This is where we are today. Your initial posts are due tonight on obstruction of justice. Interesting that we have the topic of obstruction of justice, which will probably bring us back to some of the stuff I talked about earlier. Then our live lecture, and you see here, your reply post is due Saturday, and then your written assignment is due Sunday, along with your Written assignment. Let's see, I hit it again. One more time. The live classroom phrase. That's due as well. And then you can see here that by the time we come together next week, we have one more week left. And that on the 19th, not the 20th, not the 21st, I have had students in classes to turn in assignments that Saturday, and they've gotten zeros. I had one turn it in at 12:01. I couldn't change it because it's a school rule, and I cannot change the school rule, and I will not violate the school rules. I refuse to do that. So the 19th is it. That is when all assignments are due. So everybody's clear. And somebody say, well, I didn't know that we had that Friday. I thought we had until that Sunday. Not so. It's the 19th of June. All right. So now let's close that up. And let's go into our announcement. Here we go. Okay, so standard announcement, week 4, crimes against government and public order are going to be covered today. Chapter 8 of the textbook, along with the PowerPoints that I sent you and the other information. Domestic terrorism, obstruction of justice, resisting arrest, fleeing police, disorderly conduct, and free speech. It's so appropriate that we're talking about these this week based on everything that's happening now. We're going to deal with key terms for practice for free speech and disorderly conduct and the quiz that you have this week. I don't know why it's quiz. I thought that we had quizzes. I thought we had the quiz in module 3. Let me double check. Because I thought that we had the quiz for module 3. Okay, yeah, we had the quiz for module 3. I don't think there is a quiz for module 4. Let me double check, but I think I'm right. Nope, I didn't think so, because there's only supposed to be 2 quizzes, because that was your midterm. So, live right here in class, you're going to see me do this. Um, oh, I know. This is the practice quiz. Okay, that's what that is. Okay. All right. Yeah, because you do have your practice quizzes. Okay. I caught myself there. Yeah, so there's a practice quiz that this is now preparing you for the second part of the course. All right. And then your discussion assignment, obstruction of justice, that will take place tonight, initial posts, reply post Saturday. Your written assignment, fleeing or eluding police, that's going to be due on Sunday, along with your key phrase that you know. And then take the time to complete the mid-quarter survey. I'd appreciate that. And then, you know, my motto, adversity is the springboard to success. So now let's get into the assignments for the week. Okay, so your discussion assignment has to do with obstruction of justice, and you're going to use this fact pattern, and you're going to consider this scenario with what you know about the Terry versus Ohio case. Does anybody know uh, what we call Terry versus Ohio? It's known as the what? Does anybody know? What phrase became famous? Anybody know? Terry stop. Yeah, but what is, give me more without the name of the case in it. It's called blank and blank. There we go. There you go. There you go. Get that question mark off of there. Stop putting question marks behind your statements because you get them, you hit them right there. So yeah, it's the stop and frisk case. That's exactly what it's known as. But yet, and the Terry stop case, the general theory is that you can stop a person if it appears that a reasonable person would believe that that person is, as we use the term in law school, that crime is afoot. And what that means is that there's crime in the vicinity or about to take place, and that you can stop that person briefly, question them, and you can also pat them down. Uh, for weapons. That's the purpose for it. You're not trying to find drugs and things like that. So if you pat a person down and uh, it feels like they have a bag of something in their pocket, can you go in that pocket under the Terry case? You got a little bag in their pocket. It might be like a nickel bag or a dime bag or some kind of drugs. Can you really go in their pocket? You can. You can. Need to reread the case. The case. Remember, there are two reasons why you stop the person: for the safety and protection of the officer around. Um, yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's why I said a bag. So the bag in the pocket would probably be thrown away because then, oh yeah, you grabbed some drugs. That's going to be suppressed because you're not supposed to go in the pocket of that person unless that person gives voluntary consent, you know, not if that person's in handcuffs and then you ask them, can they go in your pocket? Well, then that's a different situation. So that's what the Terry stop is all about. Okay, and you're going to take these questions and you're going to deal with them in your post. Okay, and then fleeing or eluding police, your written assignment. So here's a two-part test, a two-part assignment. So you're going to deal with crimes against the government, include free speech, disorderly conduct, uh, resisting, obstructing, fleeing from police. So you're going to deal with the challenges that law enforcement face when they pursue a fleeing vehicle. And you're going to deal with vehicles pretty much here in this discussion. I'm going to talk about others as well. But the key thing that they use in this module is talking about fleeing vehicles. And so you're going to consider these options in a two-part assignment. First, you're going to take this fact pattern, and in this assignment, you're going to examine the landmark Supreme Court cases relating to fleeing police. Okay, and so you're going to take this scenario and complete the following, looking at the police pursuit policy, and then also the Supreme Court case of Brower versus County of Invo. In a minimum of 2 pages, you're going to answer these questions. And then in the second part, you're going to create a flyer. By the way, 2 pages, double spaced. You know the routine. It's in the rubric. I'll show you in a minute. Create a flyer. Now make sure it's an original flyer. You're not copying some flyer. You can take some information, but make sure you add your original stuff. In this part, you're going to be the police officer who's been asked by your boss, the chief, to create a training flyer for officers. Okay, so you're going to, as a result, the situation that happens in this fact scenario. There's a sample statute that you can utilize and look at, and then you're going to follow each of these points. And then there's a flyer template that you can use. Now you can use another method if you want. You can submit both of these items either in a zip, or either you can submit it as 2 documents to 1 assignment. Do not do assignment number 1 and then a second attempt to put the flyer in. Don't do that. Okay, let's take a look at the rubric, which clarifies everything. And here it is, crystal clear right here. Now, just remember one of the things. In this rubric, we captured 90% of the stuff that can cause your grade to go down. Another thing that can cause your grade to go down is if you your paper run through Grammarly and the percentage is higher than 25% based on a plagiarism check. The other way is that if you rely on the textbook alone or the module alone and don't conduct any research, you'll lose 2 points. Does anybody know where you can find that statement? Anybody know where you can find that statement that you can lose 2 points without, if you don't do research? Where do you find that statement? Anybody know? Yes, that's one place, but you don't even have to go to the syllabus. Where else can you find it? That's a good point. Syllabus. But there we go. It's on the course home. And you open up the course home all the time. What happens is students forget because they say, oh yeah, I already saw that, and they forget. And I have students that say to me, well, it's not in the rubric. I'm not putting it in the rubric. I don't have to put it in the rubric. Remember what the rubric is. The rubric is overall giving you points for completing these. And these are all the maximum number of points. I can deduct points and give you 13 if you just do research. So you can lose 2 points for that as well. Anyway, so the point of the matter is you both were right. It's in the syllabus, and it's also on the course homepage. Anytime you're in any of my classes, the course homepage is a very important place to find a lot of good information from the beginning, as I usually cover during the open house, but I remind my students throughout the whole course. Okay, so then 2-page minimum, and then do your research, and then create the flyer, 1 page with a cover page, because you have in here, it tells you. All right, up here rather, I'm sorry, I'm down here. Title page, reference page. This is standard. This is standard. It's in every rubric that I have for you each of the weeks. Any questions about the assignment? Okay. Okay, we're all good. Let's delve into the module. By the way, your assignments for the weeks that the week that let's see, we just finished week 3. So week two's assignments, which I normally would have got them grade over the weekend, but because so much was going on and I was dealing with so many different things, dealing with this, um, putting together some material that I'm doing some research on concerning what's happening with this, the violence and disorderly conduct. I will have your week two grades completed in the next couple of days. Okay, so now we're going to talk about domestic terrorism, obstruction of justice, resisting arrest, fleeing police, disorderly conduct, and then we do this extra stuff here to help you guys out. So domestic terrorism. Domestic terrorism, or let's just say what terrorism is first, as the definition is given right here. And it says in here, and I'll read it, the unlawful use of force or violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce the government, the civilian population, any segment thereof, in furtherance of a political or social objective. So one of the reasons why when you have situations like that we're in right now is that there are some factors of domestic terrorism that take place that sprinkle itself among the peaceful protesters. And unfortunately, they're very successful with covering up the real issue, and that is the right of citizens to peacefully assemble. And so the key thing is that terrorism can be carried out right here on our soil and also from other governments. Now, it seems pretty clear to me that the issue of terrorism that's taking place as we're looking at it right now is not foreign terrorism, even though some have tried to, I say, stretch it to that. No, it's domestic. There are some people who want to take advantage of um, the situation that involves the loss of life of when a police officer was engaging in excessive force. And so it can be used to, as we say, to get you off on the situation that is not the real deal, and people unfortunately get caught up with it. A lot of the looting that's taking place and destruction to property itself is a combination of some domestic terrorism and some people letting off steam and just the frustration that I talked about earlier. However, the key thing that we need to recognize and understand is that usually those individuals who involve in terrorism have an agenda outside of what is really taking place. And so it says terrorism can be targeted at a specific cause. Um, and then there could be state-sponsored terrorism, an act of government. So right now, what we're dealing with is domestic terrorism with people who have their own agendas, but caught in this are innocent individuals who simply just want to um, peacefully protest what incident took place in not just Minnesota, but in other parts of the country as well. So international terrorism. Now, it talks about what that is, and it says it's an act that's dangerous to human life that occurs primarily outside the United States, uh, and that a violation of the criminal laws of the United States, or that would be a criminal violation if committed within the jurisdiction of the United States. We're talking about international terrorism that is intended to intimidate a civilian population or force the government to do something that they don't want to do. Mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. And those are the kinds of things that take place. Somebody asked me, would I characterize what that police officer did as terrorism? I said, no, that's an excessive use of force. That's what that is. And we'll leave it right at that. And so when we start to deal with international terrorism, one of the clearest example of international terrorism occurred September the 11th, 2001, where government sought to strike out at the United States on our soil. And so this was because they were carried out on U.S. soil by a foreign terrorist group, Al Qaeda, bin Laden, or whoever else that's involved. One of the things that I really don't like that the president is trying to do is he keeps mentioning a terrorist group. I can't think of the name of it. Some of you might know the name of it. It starts with an A, and he keeps wanting to bring it up. I don't like that because what that is doing is creating a situation to justify stepping up to what we use for terrorists. And that, as I said before, those people who are out protesting, most of them, yeah, I saw it. Let me see, let me get it here again. Yeah, Antifa. That's it. You got it. That's it. That's exactly what it is. And I couldn't think of, thank you, Kara, for that. But we don't want to get caught off into that dealing with this, because that's, once again, that's not the real deal. The real deal is excessive use of force and a systemic issue of racism that's taking place in this country. That's what we're talking about now, and that's what that's about. But the president has his reasons for going in his different directions. I won't spend a lot of time talking about it, but drink the juice of saying that this is what is taking place here. Domestic terrorism is carried out by terrorists who from their own country carry out attacks against citizens, government, and aims that are similar to those of international terrorists. So you have what happened with the Olympic Park bomber. You have what happened in Oklahoma City in 1995, where Timothy McVeigh and I forgot his partner's name, targeted the federal building in Oklahoma City that killed 168 people and injured more than 600 men, women, and children, because there was a daycare within the building as well. And then you deal with Ruby Ridge, where a federal agent was killed along with a 14-year-old child. So McVeigh believed that Ruby Ridge was improperly handled by the feds and used that as a basis for justifying what he did along with his partner at the Oklahoma City bombing, which is ludicrous and totally ridiculous. So who investigates this stuff? Well, we have a number of organizations that deal with this. But first of all, you should be aware you have the federal level, you have the FBI involved in it, you have the CIA is involved in it, believe it or not. You have the Secret Service that is also involved in it. And now we have the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, that's involved. However, though, the feds work together with the local departments, because as you can see from here, and if you knew about this, is that an Oklahoma trooper stopped Timothy McVeigh for a minor registration violation and then realized who he was. Eric Rudolph was apprehended by a patrol officer checking behind strip mall and found him lurking in the area. So the federal, state, local, on all levels, the county, all work together to fight domestic terrorism. Okay. Any questions about the terrorism aspect? Okay. All right. And like I said again, be very careful about allowing people to use domestic terrorism to say it's as a term to try to describe what's going on right now. That is the farthest thing from the truth. So let's talk about obstruction of justice. So obstruction of justice is can be done in a number of ways. It could be done by lying. It can also be done by covering up. Do you think that the police officers that were involved with silence or inaction participated in obstruction of justice that resulted in the death of Mr. Floyd? Anybody? Yep, Kara, yes. She's absolutely correct. Because one of the things that you have to understand is when you carry a badge and you're a law enforcement officer, your job is to serve and protect. And as has been stated several times by chiefs across the country, that you are held accountable for inaction or complacency, because then you could become an accessory to the fact. A man that I greatly respect, I saw him being interviewed on CNN, former Chicago police officer and former chief of DC Police Department, and then finally uh, the Philadelphia Police Department, Charles Ramsey, and he talked about that and is saying that the officers who refuse to do anything, they're as guilty as the individual who committed the offense of putting a knee on the neck. Um, let's not even get to the part about what we talk about. I told you they they demonstrated some force in some of the videos too, but let's just say that they were there. No, you have a responsibility, people, that you have to not participate in what we call, quote, the cover up. Here in Chicago, Laquan McDonald, the young man who was shot 16 times by Jason Van Dyke, and yeah, yep, yep, malice in all forms. Jason Van Dyke. And what happened is that the police officers, several of them, I think it was 3 or 4, that wrote reports to try to contradict what the video later uncovered. And that was the fact that there was no threat to Jason Van Dyke or any other police officer, because the question was, Jason Van Dyke arrives on the scene and he's the only one who takes out his gun and shoots, and then he continues shooting even when the kid's down, you know. So it's kind of like what the man did with the knee. Even after he was non-responsive, he wasn't moving, he kept it on there for a couple more minutes. So my point being is that if any of the officers were to come out and say, well, in reality, um, that we didn't have the obligation or responsibility, that's not true. That's not true. So here we're talking about obstruction of justice in the form of, first of all, perjury, lying on the stands. Do you not know that putting together a phony or a police report of a scene just to protect your partner is a form of perjury because that document. So, okay, uh, is that perjury is where you took the oath and then you willfully lie. So what's going to end up taking place, guys, is that you'll discover is that when you're questioned about something, you don't tell the truth after you took an oath. That's how a lot of people end up finding themselves going to jail. Governor Blagojevich went to jail for perjury. Several of Trump's supporters went to jail for perjury because they took an oath and either they lied before Congress or they lied before a court proceeding. So now back to obstruction of justice on the streets. And this is when people deliberately mislead the police and cover up or hide somebody. Of course, as it says, people are not required to talk to the police when questioned, and it provides the right to remain silent. But if you answer, you got to tell the truth and be honest. Okay, so lying to police is a criminal act under the state of Kansas, and then it describes these types of things. If you read this article, which is a very interesting one, and you'll learn a lot about obstruction of justice. So it is important for you to understand that obstruction of justice works on both sides. It's not just the people, it's law enforcement as well, as I have already shared with you dealing with this. All right. So here we go. It says, no person who is in a public place shall refuse to disclose their name, address, and so forth and so on. And then it says the person is has committed or is about to commit a criminal offense. The person witnessed any of the following. And then each of these bullet points: violence, offense that would result in create substantial risk of serious physical injury to another or property. You begin to see what I'm talking about with how law enforcement is held to the same standard. And any attempt to conspire with others in committing any offenses listed. And then finally, any conduct listed above that has been or is being about to be committed. So dealing with the Terry case, when you deal with the temporary questioning and things of that nature, you begin to see what I'm talking about here. So obstruction of justice is something that works both ways, where individuals as well as law enforcement is held accountable. Any questions about obstructions of justice from the materials that we talked about so far, or anything you want to add? Anything? Okay. So now let's get down to resisting arrest. Now, as was quite clear, it said Mr. Floyd was not resisting arrest. It says here that if a person obstructs the police, an arrest is likely to follow. When a police when the police place a person under arrest by resistance of anything, is considered resisting arrest. Now, someone might say, well, he wiggled and moved. Well, yeah, because he was uncomfortable, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's resistance. And resistance must be such that you're seeking maybe even so much as to get away, or either to cause harm or injury to the officer itself. Okay, so there are two kinds of custody that we talk about here. when we talk about resisting arrest. Explicit custody, that's what we call clear and leaves no room for misinterpretation. For example, when a police officer says you're under arrest, directs the person's hands behind their back and places handcuffs on them, the person clearly is under arrest. Now, let me put a pin in that for a minute and take you back to Mr. Floyd's situation. When the situation that you saw occurred, one of the first things they did was they put him in handcuffs and had his hands behind his back. So therefore, he was in custody. He was he was under their control because they had him in handcuffs. And then everything that happened after that demonstrated that they didn't have to do what they did to keep this young man under control. Therefore, it resulted in excessive force. Implicit custody is less clear and concerned with what a reasonable person would believe at the time of a police encounter. So the key thing that you need to know is, when do you know that you're under arrest? Anybody know? I've said this before. I don't know if I said it in this class. I've said it many times. Yep. You were in my other classes, weren't you, Kara? Okay. Yeah. So yeah, but that's the truth. When you're not free to go, that's when you're in custody. It does not require uh, people for the officer to say you're under arrest. No, you're in custody. You're in. You can't go, and that's it. It says facts and circumstances related to implicit arrest are evaluated on a case-by-case basis. For example, if a detective had been invited inside the home of a suspect to speak with him, and they spoke to him face to face at the kitchen table, this is not an arrest or custodial question. However, though, if the police officer brought four other officers and surrounded the suspect on all sides of the kitchen table, there is a perception that he's not free to go and that this person is perceived to be under arrest. Okay, so any actions you do to try to manipulate that situation could result in resisting arrest. So the last paragraph part here is resisting arrest can take many forms. As assaultive behavior toward police, as we talked about earlier, punching or kicking an officer, maybe spitting, resistive tension that the officer feels when he tries to place a person under arrest. And I'm not talking about the momentum that causes a person to go down. And so you deal with resisting arrest and obstruction statutes, like the state of Tennessee, resisting, stop, frisk, halt, arrest. It is an offense, a Class A misdemeanor for a person to intentionally prevent or obstruct anyone known to be a law enforcement officer or anyone acting in law enforcement officer's presence at their direction from effecting a stop, frisk, halt, search of any person, including defendant by use of force against the officer of another. So if in Tennessee uses a deadly weapon to resist arrest, the nature of the offense is increased to a Class A misdemeanor. There's a case called Garner versus Tennessee that you need to be aware of. Some of you are familiar with that one. That deals with excessive force as well. So now, fleeing police. Okay, now this very short scene here is a person running. Sometimes resisting a police officer is obvious. If you flee from the police, running away, one is inherently more dangerous than the other, although police officers have been injured or even killed on foot chase. More police officers, innocent civilians, and suspects are injured with vehicles, and we're going to talk about that. But There is a case that involved a young man by the name of George Scott that you've seen, where it looked almost like what this picture is, where the person was running and the police officer fired 6 shots into the back of the individuals. He didn't have any weapons. He was just running. Can't do that. That's an excessive force situation. Somebody said the reason why they do that is because they don't feel like chasing the person, but that's an excessive force situation that that resulted in that officer that shot that person being charged with murder and was convicted as well. So fleeing in vehicles involve a number of factors, and I'm just going to touch very briefly on these because of the fact that you have an assignment that you have to do. But it, when I was in the academy, we dealt with these points right here. The time of the day, the volume of pedestrian and vehicular traffic, the nature of the offense, what was the weather at that time, the speed of the pursuit. And the key thing is that the officer is held to a requirement based on the policies and procedures based on pursuit to balance with pursuing the individual with not endangering anybody's lives or in those situations. Because as you and I both know, that there have been many pursuits where innocent parties driving down the street have been killed because of chases that took place. And so there are various techniques that law enforcement teaches as far as how to stop an individual. And if you look at this case, Scott versus Harris, you'll understand some of the issues. The key thing is we want to preserve life at any cost. And so we were taught these various stop techniques, the pit, pursuit intervention techniques, where you see that we were able to bump the vehicle. However, though, it depends on the speed. And the key thing is to try to stop the individual or slow it down. There's another technique, stop sticks. You've seen that before where they put them across. And we had to do that in street stops that I worked when I was an officer. And what it does is it deflates the tires. And then another one here is the partial roadblock, where we block off, and then also stop sticks can be used as a backup for that as well. The so back to the point that we have here of the pit. I want to just make sure you understand that we would make connections. Notice the police car that you would be next to it. Here's your target, and then you would try to use the right front to try to get that vehicle to turn eventually so that then that person will not be able to go further. And so those are just some of the techniques. All right. Disorderly conduct. We have a constitutional right to free speech and to peacefully assemble and protest. That's what the First Amendment is paramount for. However, though, disorderly conduct can occur when free speech goes beyond the controls or parameters of controlling the circumstance or situation. So what happens is that when there is a breach of the peace, and there are, like, let's say, for example, then we start to get with obstacles being thrown, maybe even obscenities hurled, and sometimes loud language. And I'm not talking about chanting, but depending upon the circumstances. Now, the protest that you've been watching in the last few days should not fit under disorderly conduct until it gets to the point where there's some property damage, looting, or either attempt to hurt somebody, but just simply marching and then hands up, or saying I can't breathe, or even some obscenities. As long as it's not hurled at the face of an individual, then you can possibly get away with it. But the key thing that you need to be aware of is that it is important that it be done in a right fashion and form. Now, the peaceful protests, as I already said earlier, were designed to get a point across. But at the same time, if it gets out of control, where people get turned violent or destructive in terms of property, then in that case, that's when we get to the disorderly aspects of it. As the Black's Law Dictionary, which is a dictionary that we lawyers know about from law school, says a riot is a tumultuous disturbance of the peace by three or more assembling together of their own authority with the intent mutually to assist each other against anyone who oppose. So what the riot is, something to, I should put, to get people fired up so that they take action that result in property loss, physical injury, and sometimes even death. And then this is a video you can take time to look at that was put together, and you'll learn a lot about that as well. Okay, so that's it for this. So now let's go through some of the key terms before we adjourn. Look at the flashcards. I encourage you to use these. Run Adobe, allow it the first time, and then it will be okay. So it's time for you all to help me out with these answers. A tumultuous disturbance of the peace by three or more persons assembling together of their own authority with the intent mutually to assist each other against any who shall oppose. I just told you. What is it? Exactly. Laws that prohibit the use of obscenities, profane, boisterous language that is likely to cause a breach of the peace. What is that? Yep. Very good. Using physical force to resist lawful arrest. What's it called? It's in the words in here anyway. All right. She's on a roll. Either she did this earlier or she just knows this stuff. I think she knows it. Custody that is clear and is concerned with what a reasonable person would believe at the time of a police encounter. Implicit custody. You wouldn't know that exactly because we didn't cover that. All right. So then let's go to the next one. So you can go over those. By the way, make sure you go over them all because, again, I already said what I said about your exam coming up week 6. Free speech and disorderly conduct. Man is walking in the middle of the street in a busy downtown entertainment district yelling profanities. Is this free speech or disorderly conduct? Yep. Very good. Abortion activists are standing on a street corner holding signs of aborted fetuses that some citizens cite as offensive. Is this free speech or disorderly conduct? Yep. You might not agree with it. You might not like it. You might consider this gross, but yes, it is free speech. It's just like I can tell you that the Nazis marching through a Jewish community, which happened here in our area, with a permit and expressing their free speech. That's what it was. We might not have liked what they said, but they still have a right to it. And the whole key thing is that if we're going to censor people, then it won't be long before it gets to you. Um, Edward is watching a movie with some friends inside a theater that is half full. Edward says to his friends, "Watch this," and yells, "Fire," causing patrons to run out of the theater. One patron calls police and complains. Is this free speech or disorderly conduct? Yeah, because there's a case called N. Ray Shank where we talked about this in law school. Do one more. Animal protesters standing on a sidewalk holding a sign of abused cattle and chanting, "Save the cows." Is this considered free speech or disorderly conduct? Yeah. It's just like people who don't believe in fur coats and stuff like that, and people wearing their fur coats and so forth and so on. So you might not agree with it. So going to a bunch of vegetarians and walking down the street eating a steak. Oh gosh. Okay, the final thing. Do take these all very seriously, but especially this part here, because some of these questions are straight from the quiz. You already know that because you found that out when you took the last week. A local resident is suspected of setting off a truck bomb at a religious temple, intentionally targeting the parishioners. This is an example of what? What is it? You have to see. Okay, let's try domestic because that's exactly what it is. That's why they said a local resident. Domestic carried out by terrorists who are from within the country. That's why they put that in there. Yep, yep, yep. You got it. A foreign national living in your community is part of a terrorist organization from another country and intentionally blows up a city hall building to avenge the death of others in his country. What is this? Exactly, because it's carried out by someone outside the country. Let's do one more. You can stop a man that you believe was about to break into a store, but stopped when he saw your marked squad car. You question him and he lies about his name. What will you place him under arrest for? Yeah. Why not perjury? Why not perjury? Excellent. Excellent. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Not under oath. And that's it. So those are some of the things that you want to consider um, very seriously when you get ready to do that. Wait a minute, I saw that real quick. What was that? Yeah, that's true. Thank you, Kara. I missed that one. Uh, Don't put he's under oath with a question mark. Yeah, there we go. Busted by your own classmate. No, but seriously, that's because what you're doing is you're expressing doubt about what you're dealing with. Okay, so that's it, guys, for today. I had to start out the class today talking about the situation that we're dealing with because it's so appropriate for what we're actually doing in school, for why you guys are in school, and that's to fix stuff like that. So, any ideas for the phrase or a word? Any? Uh, that's a good one, but that's not it. But that is a good one. Close. Obstruction of justice. So you were right there, Chantel. And that's a form of that. Obstruction of justice. Give me that, and you get your points. All right, guys, stay safe out there. Um, and, again, keep moving closer to becoming that professional I know you all are going to become. Um, keep your ethics right. And I know that you guys are going to be the future. And I can be able to, as I'm 70 years old, be able to leave this world and leave a mark on society that I helped produce professional criminal justice individuals. So thank you. All right, guys. See you next week.